Okay, everyone, hello, and welcome to our October Member Lunch and Learn webinar. We are excited to be hosting this webinar on Trammell's Trace during Texas Archaeology Month, which is this month. My name is Samantha Hunnick, and I am the programs coordinator here at Preservation Texas. And before we get started, I wanted to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded and that recording is going to be posted on your Preservation Texas account portal so that you can go back and rewatch it later if you want to. And to access that portal, just go to preservationtexas.org/login. Also, we will be having a Q&A session at the end of Gary's presentation today. So feel free to drop any questions that you may have during the presentation. Just drop those in the Q&A feature by clicking that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And also, we will be giving away 2 copies of Gary's book, Trammell's Trace, The First Road to Texas from the North, at the end of the presentation. So stick around so that you may be in that drawing. Your speaker and presenter today is Gary Pinkerton. Gary is an independent researcher and author who has published 3 books of history. A 4th about early contraband trade in East Texas is coming in March 2025. His education as a social worker and his career in human resources, combined with his innate curiosity, continue to fuel more detailed looks into all types of sources for historical research. Gary is currently the managing director of the Alliance for Texas History and is a fellow of the East Texas Historical Association. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Gary.
Thanks, Sam. I'm really looking forward to telling people about this trail and how my interest in it came to be. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining during lunchtime today. It's, I guess, for the next few hours or a couple of days, it's winter in Texas, right? 50-degree drop. So this journey for me on Trammell's Trace began almost 20 years ago. And what I'll do is go through and talk to you about that journey and some of the methodology used to locate it and to tell some stories about one of Preservation Texas' most endangered sites at Epperson's Ferry. So like most every Texan, our understanding of Texas history is clouded by a lot of myth and legend. I'm still amazed you can still buy a coonskin cap at many restaurants and convenience stores these days, but there's just more to the story than we typically see at that level. So in 2004, I grew up in Longview, Texas. We have family land in Ruts County near Mount Enterprise. And my father happened to mention Trammell's Trace. I'd never heard of it before, even though it's mentioned on a historical marker at a cemetery where my relatives are buried. I just missed that part. My mom would have to explain that to you. So I asked him what that was, and he said, "Oh, that's the rut across the pasture down at the family farm." And I was amazed. I couldn't believe it. So I did what everybody does at that point, is get on Google. And that was compounded by my terminal illness of curiosity. So the more threads I pulled, I ran across a lot of myth and legend and things that simply were not true about Trammell's Trace. But I dug and wrote and gathered data and filled up a 4-drawer lateral file cabinet with material and began the process of heading toward a book some years later. What I learned early on was that Trammell's Trace was one of the routes for immigration into Texas. And in fact, it was, as the book title says, the first northern route. So if people have ancestry who came from Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, and Tennessee, particularly in that pre-Republic era, they likely came down Trammell's Trace across our family land. I learned that the Anglo use of the trail was not nearly the beginning, that the Caddo sites all along southwest Arkansas, northeast Texas had this route running through them. So The trail was adapted from these Caddo trading trails, which were part of a bigger network of nationwide trails. When turquoise from Minnesota can be found in an archaeological site near Liberty, Texas, that gives you a sense of the breadth of these trading trails for centuries. I learned more about the early road in the 1800s. One section of the route after crossing the Red River into the Texas side was covered with 7 miles of cane that looked like this. It was 30 feet high, and it curved to form these dark, shadowy tunnels that riders came through. That was land that became prime cotton planting ground in those floodplains. This 1863 Civil War era map showed the city at the Great Bend of the Red River, Fulton, Arkansas, showed the ford at low water and a little tiny boat there to show that there was a ferry when needed. And the map maker used a very simple explanation of to describe the roads on the Texas side, that they were just impracticable. That's very tactful, I thought. The more research I did, I learned that Crockett and Houston and Bowie had traveled down that rut through our woods. And that's usually at the point where I start to get chill bumps talking about the road. This is the route through our family land. You can tell from the shape of this road that this part of the corridor later became a county road. And in fact, it was part of the first farm to market road in Texas, about 6.5 miles from Shiloh Baptist Church into Mount Enterprise. So all that developed my interest in, as this author of a really remarkable book, On Trails by Robert Moore, said, walking in Meriwether Lewis's footsteps makes my feet tingle. And that's where I have been off and on over the years in visiting these old routes that were traveled for so many years. Another part of my education was about Nicholas Trammell. There are 12 or 13, 14 national historic trails, and only 2 of them are named for people. So it's very unusual. Trails are named from where they start to where they end, the Natchez Trace. But this one was named for him because of his use of it at a particular time in history. Trammell was born into a family of horsemen and gamblers and grew up in Rogues Harbor in Logan County, Kentucky, right across the Tennessee line. If your neighborhood is called Rogues Harbor, that should tell you a lot about what people thought about the area and the people who lived there. He lived in Tennessee, Kentucky without moving. He moved to Missouri, Northeast Missouri, into Arkansas, then into Texas briefly, then back to Arkansas, and then ended his life near Gonzales, Texas. A lot of myth and legend of him as a highwayman and a robber, but he was a frontier businessman. This painting by David Wright, just an incredible artist, represented the era, and I thought was a good illustration for this. But when I made this presentation at the Bullock for one of their lunch and learns, I remember a Trammell descendant was there and said that this picture looked a lot like her family. And it fit the physical description of a soldier that met him in 1846 on their way to the war with Mexico. Besides the physical description, that soldier said this of Trammell: he would perform with fidelity and honor whenever he undertook, but it was prudent to watch him after he completed his assignment. It sounds like what you'd say about a relative that you need to invite for Thanksgiving dinner, but you count the silver after they use, right? After they leave. So my short version of a description of Nicholas Trammell: he's a smuggler, a gambler, and a Methodist. And for those of you who are Methodists, like I grew up, that doesn't have a whole lot of, I mean, it makes some sense there. It's actually possible. Big into racing, big into smuggling, racing horses. So after all that introduction of years of just digging into the research, I became what we call a certifiable rut nut. I was hooked. I wanted to know more and to learn more, and there was much more to be learned. So part of my small print and disclaimer is that there is not a 12-step program for this. So if you continue in this presentation, you're on your own. That's my warning. So part of the transition to go from learning these basics into learning about the route is represented by these three illustrations here. Headright surveys from the original Texas land surveys maintained by the General Land Office. My conversion of those survey notes into a GIS type program to log and mark and catalog those locations, and then translating those coordinates into something more usable and accessible like Google Maps, which I have on the website. So using the Google Maps on your phone, you can set it on the dash, drive around beautiful East Texas, and see when you might be near the remains of Trammell's Trace. Each one of those blue markers is a known point where Trammell's Trace existed at the time of these original surveys. Those surveys have survey notes that describe the distance that Trammell's Trace crossed from a particular corner of the survey. They're expressed in the Spanish varas, so they have to be converted. And a few of them have these wonderful graphic illustrations that show Trammell's Trace, and in this case, an intersection with the Shreveport Road, a later road in the middle of this survey to the south of Marshall. Here's that same survey. There's the point of crossing for Trammell's Trace called in the survey notes, and there is the crossing of the Shreveport Road. Every one of these green X's in the black box is a survey call made in the original survey for that land grant. So these are known points where Trammell's Trace crossed on the ground. I convert the varas to feet and lay out those coordinates for mapping very precisely. In between the green dots, this is a very close alignment here. This is, if you know Marshall, this is Interstate 20, and this is Highway 59. So this is just south of the interstate right there along Highway 59. Between the points, they're not always this close. I followed the terrain and the contours and have used that method to find stream crossings, particularly between 2 points that were fairly distant. So very accurate placement of Trammell's Trace, and that's really what makes a lot of this possible. Each of those green X's that are known points is represented on Google Maps by these pins. So every one of those is a known point for Trammell's Trace. When you start looking for roads and ruts, if you've driven east from Nacogdoches along the El Camino Real, you can see ruts crossing from the right and the left, weaving down that corridor when the road passes straight through. But not every old rut in the woods is an old historic road. There's been a lot going on in the woods that have been grown over. The Oregon-California Trails Association, OCTA, developed this really excellent guide, very precise guide for mapping immigrant trails. And they use the 4 cardinal rules of determining if a rut like these are old roads indeed. There must be confirming documentary evidence. We have that in spades here with the coordinates and the survey calls from the original headright surveys. It must have linear uniformity. It must make sense for point A to connect to a distant point B in some way. And then there's got to be physical or topographical evidence. We do have physical ruts up and down the trace. I'll show you some of those, as well as topographical references. And then those 3 must agree. And so all this mapping has been done with those cardinal rules in mind. Jeffrey Williams, who did a master's thesis for the School of Forestry at Stephen F. Austin, did very detailed surveys of a section of the El Camino Real east of Nacogdoches near Lobanillo Swales. If you have an opportunity to visit Lobanillo Swales, east of San Augustine. I would encourage you to go there. I think it is the best representation of old Spanish trails in Texas, anywhere in the state. There are 6 or 7 parallel ruts down a hillside, some deep, some wide, some narrow, that were used as turnouts by the cart traffic smuggling contraband back and forth between Nacogdoches and Natchitoches. Highly recommended. But Jeff did a analysis of the 4 different types of ruts and how they grow: narrow and rounded, very narrow and rounded, wide and rounded, or wide and flat that he found. And there's his citation for that at SFA ScholarWorks. So in addition to old maps and headright surveys, there are many old county abstract maps or survey maps that show these trails along their boundaries. 2/3 of the boundary between Rusk and Panola County was defined as Trammell's Trace when it was created. I don't think there's any other situation in Texas similar to that. Creeks and rivers and streams we're familiar with being those boundaries, but for Trammell's Trace to be defined as part of the boundary in 1843 just spoke to its permanence on the landscape and its importance in defining those boundaries. Besides those old maps and references, there's also the opportunity to use aerial imaging. This is a site up in Cass County. I'll show you a little bit more of it in just a minute, but you can see I moved the line there over a bit. You can see the shadow of a rut across this pasture on this aerial image. If that rut, there are lots of ruts like this that you may find, but it has that linear uniformity that I mentioned a minute ago that speaks to its importance. There's also LiDAR maps available through the National Map Viewer. That is a Geological Service mapping tool, and using their hillside stretched view, you can get these LiDAR images and as overlays on your area of interest. This is our family farm in Rusk County, just north of Mount Enterprise. This is Highway 315 and Highway 95. We live on a little edge of a county road here, and that's the LiDAR image of the road, the current road. You can also see there the shadow image of the rut as it crosses our pasture. That picture of me was standing in it was right about there. It's been plowed and planted in Bahia grass and coastal Bermuda and watermelons. So a lot of that has been destroyed in the middle. That aerial image I showed you a minute ago, right there, this is that rut in that pasture with a lot of interest from family members and others. So when we visit those sites, and I was able to walk north and south along this route, it helps to verify that this is more than just a plowing that took place years ago. It has some legitimate historical meaning. All this is made possible by landowners, and I found and met a group of very interested and supportive landowners interested in the history of the trail and its presence on their property, and 100% interested in preserving what they have. These 3 generations of gentlemen are just to the north of us and have part of that county road, Trammell's Trace corridor that passes south of Shiloh Church, and they are hard and fast dedicated to maintaining that. Another distant cousin just north of them had a pipeline company want to dig across his remains of that old road, and he made them dig underneath it. He wouldn't even let them break ground across it. This gentleman lost his land to lignite mining, and I asked him how hard that must have been to see the family land go away and be surface mined for coal. And he said, yeah, it was pretty hard until the Brinks truck showed up in my driveway. So there are these realities and economic realities that impinge on this history all the time. So the ruts that they have helped me find over the years have included a whole variety. This is in Marion County. And what we'll find is these road corridors will follow old roads. My adage is that new roads follow old roads until the bulldozers show up. And so where a historic corridor for Trammell's Trace might have curved back and forth, these earlier county roads, and this kind of has the look of one on this side because of the bank. Over here, though, is another lighter used rut that does not make sense in the landscape and fits the match of Trammell's Trace. This one is just west of Avenger. It's right along a county road. You can drive up to it and look at it. I cover a lot of these locations in my publication about finding Trammell's Trace on the website, but it's very distinctly not a roadway because of the depth and curvature of this surface. Same with this one. It's in an unusual place. You'll find a lot of these ruts protected by tree growth, so they couldn't be cultivated or dug up. I've found other ruts like this, even deeper, that were used to discard trash and refrigerators and various debris from rural properties. But this is another one exactly along the route. This landowner and I looked at the flood gauge on the Little Cypress Bayou west of Jefferson on his property until that was at his lowest mark possible. Just upstream to the left here is a catch basin, kind of a wide spot in the bayou. Hard to tell whether it was dug out or naturalized, but it narrows down into this little channel. And what we wanted to see was right here below the low water. And it's these stones that line this path across the Cypress Bayou, indicating that it was used for some wagon traffic or other foot traffic at some point. And these stones extend well up into these cypress swamps and were put there long before this cypress tree ever grew. This rut and the next one are precisely on the county line between Rusk and Panola County. And otherwise, we'd have a hard time understanding why that rut exists there. But that was what it was remains of. This one was as well. And you can imagine what this little patch of unmowed, uncut rutway looked like on an aerial photo, but it was very well defined, as you might imagine. Hard to get down in there and mow it out, and nobody felt the need for it. So these briars are thick. The cedar trees and the oaks have grown up in the midst of that. Both this rut and the one prior, a few years back, looked like this. They were right along the path of lignite mining for surface mining for coal in the counties in Northeast Texas. In fact, when you overlay Trammell's Trace along the permits for those surface mining locations, it just about could not have been worse with this lengthening of it down there. It may be that we do find old trails. Jeff Williams found this in the El Camino Real, that the surface geology, the soil types, make a difference in where old trails went, and that makes sense. There is a lignite-based crossing on the Sabine River for Trammell's Trace. And so that presence of that hard surface along this route may have actually been part of the reason that the trail used that. But it's suffered greatly from surface mining in there. The almost kind of sort of good news is that there were many archaeological studies required for that. And so each of those red triangles on the Texas Historical Atlas represents an archaeological site. Which brings us to part of the reason that Preservation Texas is hosting this session is that Trammell's Trace also crosses through one of their most endangered sites, which is Epperson's Ferry crossing on the Sulphur River. The Sulphur River is the boundary between Cass and Bowie County. And I was able to visit that a couple of times during the course of this research. In 2022, Preservation Texas made Epperson's Ferry one of Texas' most endangered places. Mark Epperson began a ferry there in 1834, which became one of the early mail stops along the Republic of Texas route. well-documented family histories are being developed about Epperson, and he is the original grantee of the Headright survey at that location. Not only is that site endangered by potential flooding of the or raising the elevation of Wright Patman Lake, it wouldn't be the first time that this marker, which is now on the ground, it may be up. We'll ask Sue in a minute. It was knocked over by a vehicle at its present location, which was along Highway 71. It was moved from its original location back where I was standing at the river when Wright Patman Lake was impounded. So Luis de Moscoso Alvarado took over after Hernando de Soto died in their Spanish expedition 1539 to 1542. Multiple studies have been done about the likely route of Moscoso as he wandered around the southeastern United States. And the majority of those point to a likely crossing at Epperson's Ferry. So the history of this crossing goes back some years. These are the routes that other people have suggested that Moscoso and his party took across the landscape there. They don't have the benefit of surveyor calls. Skipper Steely, one researcher in this area, upon reading that Moscoso had 300 to 500 hogs with them, suggested that we follow hog scat in archaeological sites across the area. I'm not sure how that's worked out. We did get to visit there with some Epperson descendants a few years back. There's Sue Lazara, the vice president of Preservation Texas, and some Epperson descendants in that party. And those of you who know Sue knows that she would be the kind of person to represent camouflage fashion. That's a very fashionable top there, Sue. You're not fooling us. You're not going deer hunting. So when we visited and saw this rut, I still get chill bumps talking about it. And that's because if this indeed was a crossing used for hundreds of years by Moscoso and his wandering journeys, or as a trading trail, a part of that Caddo network, to think about the numbers of people and the diversity of people and the lives of people who crossed here, who had to camp here on their way south because the river was too high to cross, just causes you to have a true sense of history in a very emotional way. And as I'll explain in a minute, I think finding ways to tie people emotionally to this history is the key to the success of organizations like Preservation Texas and of authors like me who want to communicate that history. River crossings could be difficult, and this natural crossing just upstream here, where I think it's Watley Creek comes into the Sulphur, was a natural shoal across this very low-lying land. The roads leading down to Epperson's Ferry were used up until the 1920s and perhaps later, and you can see remains of those type ruts, as well as other corridors on either side that would represent a lesser trail. This current topographic map shows that region and the boundaries of Wright Patman Lake currently. I can tell you the water levels don't always get that high at that location, but that's what's represented on the topo. Soils maps of Texas are very helpful, county soils maps. There was one for Bowie County here that showed in 1921 where some roads went down to the ferry and crossing on the other side. There's an original Texas land survey point right across this very low land. You can see the topography here on this side and on this side. Epperson's home site is up on a fairly good sized bluff, very low all down through here. Future fishing. Here's that LiDAR-like map from the National Map Viewer showing the point of crossing for Epperson. You can see some slight remains of roads in the landscape there, and a little bit more down here and there. This is the 1909 topographic map. It's always nice to find these old topos. Hidden in there are some home sites showing the path of these roads as it lines up compared to the modern map. It's an overlay. Here's a broad aerial image of at 1955, before the lake was impounded. You can see how the landscape looked during that time, and that there had been some agricultural or land clearing down here even at that time. Here's a little bit closer look. You can see a little bit of the roadways that cross through down there, and even a tiny image of it as it crossed the other side of the Sulphur to the south. This is all before the impoundment of the lake. So at various times during these lake-related activity, that there were archaeological investigations done. In 1952, they didn't come close to Epperson's Ferry, but it was in that time frame that the original Epperson's Ferry historical marker, which was located at the river, was pulled up out of the woods onto the main highway. Again, there was in 1970, there were some more extensive surveys done. 30 different sites out of 140 surveyed were recommended for further excavation. And they defined these regions to have encompassed one of the most extensive and archaeologically promising, and yet comparatively least studied excavated regions in the Western Hemisphere. And then in 2002, related to some forestry work, they looked at 2 sites at Epperson's Ferry, primarily to determine if they were eligible for the National Register. One was, and one was deemed not eligible. So after looking at all this history and doing all the research and learning all these things about the past and current and future possibilities for this site, we're kind of left with the question, as people interested in history, so what? You know, what difference does it make to people now, and why is it important? And what will protection of these kind of sites mean? And so I talk to people about paying history forward. And, you know, like a lot of things, I think the way that it started for me is a way that it could start for other people. And that was by developing this very personal and emotional connection to the history of places, people, and things, and draw some line between what happened then and what happened now to connect it to that person, so that they know there's more to what they're seeing than what's visible in front of their eyes. In my latest book, the one that'll come out in March, about smuggling and contraband in East Texas, I have an opening chapter book called "Seeing What the Land Remembers," and what that means to me is being able to develop an eye to look back in time in a way when you're at a place, and to realize that those grainy photos and artist renditions represent real people, a person that could stand beside you if they were here now. They don't represent some caricatures or some theoretical person or event. There were real things. Carolyn Korsmeyer had a very excellent article where she talked about how people connect to archaeological remains and to recreations of historic sites. And along this spectrum are representations of what existed in history. The superstar of them all for me is the LaSalle exhibition at the Bullock Museum in Austin. If you haven't seen it since they redid this, it's incredible. And, you know, recovering that ship from the bottom of the bay was a tremendous accomplishment and just nearly perfect in every way. Other representations, recreations like Caddo Mounds, which recently rebuilt their reopened their visitor center after a tornado destroyed it 3 years ago. It's spectacular. Villa de Austin, San Felipe de Austin State Historic Site has recreated that villa to make it come to life. Other efforts don't hit the mark. I had reason to visit Lake Havasu City, Arizona, and see the London Bridge. And I have to tell you, even if it's the real London Bridge, brick by brick, or at least the facade, it did not have the same impact as the London Bridge should have had. So I'm not sure how it ended up in the middle of the desert, but there it is. Even small artifacts, holding an arrowhead in your hand, a piece of pottery that comes up from the ground from hundreds of years ago. People connect with these things, and it makes a big difference. But besides those objects and places, it's all about the story. There's a really complex interplay between how story communicates both cultural wisdom to a people going forward and a history. I had occasion to visit Caddo Mounds on one of their Caddo culture days, and as they did the drum dance, I couldn't help but wonder what the difficulties have been to keep that part of their culture alive over hundreds of years against all kinds of challenges. But stories that are told make a point. They make it memorable for people. They build connections, and that's what I try to do in my books and in talking to people about these histories. So with Trammell's Trace, since the publication of the book in 2016, I've been fortunate to connect with others that are interested in that topic. That's been people who live in those counties. I found a lot of people who knew a little bit about Trammell's Trace, but not anybody who knew very much at all, and certainly not the whole picture and the history in its place. I was pleasantly surprised one day to look on the Tester Historical Sites Atlas and see Trammell's Trace laid in there. Trammell's Trace and the El Camino Real are the only two roads laid in like this, and it has to do with the opportunity I had to define those coordinates where the trace was found. So it's on historic sites, and archaeologists and TxDOT and whoever uses that atlas to look for archaeological sites can see the trail as well. Logan Hope, back in I think 2018, was a student at Stephen F. Austin, and he entered this 3 foot by 3 foot poster in a contest at the GIS Forum and won first place. That poster is now set to become kind of a centerpiece for a new exhibit at the Depot Museum in Henderson, Russ County, about Trammell's Trace. And he did an excellent job and did well enough to beat out a lot of professionals. I may be somewhat biased, but I think this is the best damn historical marker in the entire state of Texas. It's that tall, black granite. It has inscriptions on both sides. My name, as well as Nancy Tiller's name, the cartographer that did the map, are on there. So I think I'm one of the few historians who has his name on a granite marker before he's dead. So I'm pleased to mention that last part especially. It is at the farmers market at the foot of Hospital Street, just off North Street at Bonita Creek Park. And I would encourage you to go by and pay a visit. Bring a little light rag, if you would please, just to keep the grass off the bottom of that. But that was erected by the Stone Fork chapter of the Daughters Republic of Texas, and I'm just simply amazed at what they accomplished with that. Almost comparable to that was being on Texas Country Reporter in Bob and Kelly last year's, managing that long-running TV show. They came to our family farm and walked the trail with us. And there's a link on my website. If you click on the Trammell's Trace book, you'll see a link to the video for that episode where I can tell a little bit more about the story and how it came to be. But that's a pretty good deal right there. I was very pleased. And so the reason we do all those things and try to tell the story, and why we're talking about Epperson's Ferry in advance of the possibility that parts of it could be inundated by raising the elevation of the lake is because we don't want any more sites. I don't want any more pieces of Trammell's Trace to look like this. And it's a hard fact of life how even though we have archaeological sites to tell us more about what might have happened on that, that we do that only when it's preceded by digging it up and doing away with it for all time. So I appreciate the opportunity to tell this story to you and hope that you will invite others to learn more as well. I do have at the website, you'll see a link to the book. If you don't win the book and would like to purchase one, you can do it there. And I would appreciate that purchase from me rather than Amazon. Jeff Bezos will not miss you one bit. But use the code FREESHIP and that'll take the shipping cost off, just as if we did that in person. I've also got a short electronic download about finding Trammell's Trace that covers some of these topics and it gives locations to where all these ruts and markers are located up and down. So I really appreciate your time and attention, and I'll look forward to your questions. If you scan that code with your phone, you'll go to the website as well. All right, Sam, back to you.
Thank you, Gary. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
We're going to have some time for Q&A now. If y'all have any questions, go ahead and post those in the Q&A right now. In the meantime, a comment from Robert Killian about the centennial marker near the Epperson's ferry crossing. He says it is up, that he visited on Saturday. So that's good.
Excellent. Good to hear.
Okay, so first question, informative and thoughtful presentation, Gary. Thank you for sharing this information. Besides depressions in the earth, are there other topological features to look for, such as trees or other plant species transplanted intentionally or unintentionally that might indicate the presence of historic roads or trails?
Not really. Every now and then I hear from somebody talking about Indian marker trees. And I have to tell you, I'm not a believer. A tree would have to be 200 plus years old to have been used in that way. And so it's more likely took a hard freeze when we got that last burst of winter freeze in March when it's wet. Vegetation planted by birds. I found nandinas in places where nandinas should not exist. Grapevines. There has also been mention of peach orchards and peaches planted along routes. I haven't seen that myself, but one of the roads connected to this latest book south of Nacogdoches is called Durazno Creek, which is the Spanish word for peach, which would tell you a little bit about that. But no, I don't really think there are. I get asked from time to time about metal detecting as well. And it's 180 miles of trail. There is one intersection of a branch of the trail that goes up to Pecan Point at the Red River and the one that goes east toward Fulton, Arkansas, where a campground existed in later years. Having visited that and almost having the undergrowth rip my hunting jacket off, it was so thick. There won't be any metal detecting there for some time.
Okay, next question. Where did Trammell's Trace begin and end?
It began in Fulton, Arkansas, and Fulton, Arkansas was at the Great Bend of the Red River. The Red River makes a 90-degree bend right there. Fulton's up on a big bluff. And from Fulton to the northeast was what was known as the Southwest Trail, or the old military road that's diagonally across Arkansas, pretty much like Interstate 30 is. It goes up to the area near Batesville, Arkansas, and on toward Memphis. And so when the Louisiana Purchase took place, that road got extended and extended and extended farther to the southwest by the military to encompass those borders and begin to, quote, take over that road. So Fulton, Arkansas, and then in northwestern Cass County was that intersection. One point of contact from there up to Pecan Point in Jonesboro on the Red River near Clarksville was where Nicholas Trammell himself was credited with opening the trail to allow families from the Red River to migrate down into Austin's colony, 1821 to 1823 or so. And then from there, it kind of cut across Marion County to the southwest of Jefferson. And you can see on the map, if you go to the website, somebody asked about sharing the QR code. Just go to GaryLPinkerton.com and click on the Trammell's Trace book, and you can get the Google Maps version of this. You can also download for free a printed map that shows the actual route of the trail and some of those connecting points. It essentially terminated in Nacogdoches at the El Camino Real, and there is calls of roads near where that Nacogdoches marker exists today. But there are also more roads around Nacogdoches than there were through Nacogdoches because of the nature of the travel. And so there's the very last survey call is actually at our family land. And I've been able to put together bits and pieces to with other road calls to find a way down to Nacogdoches.
Okay, next question. What commitment would be required to chart the route of Potter's Trace from Potter's Point westward to Trammell's Trace? Do you know of any sections of that trace that have been documented to date?
Is that Sue's question?
Yes.
How did I know that? Well, hey, Sue, good to, I know you're there. What part of the world you're in, we never know. Yeah, we'd have to see. We started a project a few years ago with a retired geographer from Sam Houston State, Jim Tiller. Jim and Nancy Tiller and a GIS professional from Sam created this incredible atlas of boundary maps for the Republic of Texas. It is bound in a ginormous volume, leather bound, in a few institutions, but the General Land Office, historictexasmaps.com or .org, I think, it may be .com, has those maps available. And so he and I began a project a few years ago of reading headright surveys for all the counties east of the Trinity River. We are about 8,500 into that madness. And so, Sue, if you want to email me, I think we've done Marion and others. I don't recall seeing a road called Potter's Trace on any of the surveys, but I'll look again and we can talk about that later. But there are a lot of other roads called in these land surveys all over the country, and you can put bits and pieces together of them use the same methods. But I'll be happy to share any of that county by county database with anybody who wants to see that.
Okay. Did you see any surviving evidence or clues concerning a plank road into Cass County that Mark Epperson included in his 1850s charter to improve his transportation facilities?
No, and I think the plank roads were not along the same corridor, but I do in the book cover that whole tollway mentality that tried to take a foothold in Texas. There was a board road proposed north of the Sabine over in Harrison County, and the one that was mentioned there with Epperson, but I never could find any real evidence that these things ever materialize. There is some very good discussion and archaeological work of other plank type roads so that you can see what those are like. There was a plank road in that 1863 Civil War era map that showed a corduroy road is what they named it, horizontal logs coming down a very slippery hillside into Fulton at the very bottom end of that Southwest Trail.
Okay. Is your visual presentation from today available to participants?
I think, Sam, you said it was going to be posted at some point.
It'll be posted on your member portal.
Yeah, and my email is on the website. There's a contact form on the website. There is a Facebook page for Trammel Straits Rut Nuts, if you'd like to join and find that. And that's the best place to see what's going on these days with that. The Epperson's Ferry marker was not the only one to end up in a ditch based on a car accident. A centennial marker at the Rusk-Panola County line east of Henderson, about a 4,800-pound block of granite has rolled down a hill into a ditch. And so we're trying to work with various state agencies to get that prop back up. But yeah, just email me and, let me know what you need, and I'm happy to share anything that I've got. I'm happier if you'll purchase a book.
Yes. Okay, one more question. Could you share your best tips for amateur historians or researchers looking to publish a book?
Oh man, if you're married, make sure you have a willing spouse, because that book widow thing is reality. I think my wife's probably nodding her head over there. She's ended up being not only accommodating my time and travels and visits to archives, but being #1 reader and editor and red pen wielder for several books now. But it does make a difference. The big thing, and this is kind of part of the foundation of the people that have formed the Alliance for Texas History, and that is to be historically accurate. And when I started this Trammel Straits project, the stories and legend about Nicholas Trammell, even on historical markers, said he was a surveyor and a ferryman. He did live at a very important crossing, the El Camino Real and the Trinity River, for a couple of years before he was chased off and back into Arkansas. So a ferryman, maybe, not ever a surveyor. He was a horse racer. He gambled and he smuggled horses. So just avoid the myth and legend. The way I've talked about it with others is that the one thing that separates true history from just some historical writing is footnotes. I consider footnotes the root canal of writing. They're no fun, but you just got to do them. You've got to tell what your sources are and document. The story will come, but you got to get the facts right first. So keep good notes, footnote everything when you first find it. For this book, I got all excited and started piecing things together before I had to go back and look in that 4-drawer lateral file cabinet to find out where the heck that came from.
All right, so let's go ahead and do the drawing. We're going to be giving away 2 copies of Gary's book. I have a online name picker app that we're going to use. See if this works. Can you see
I'm
that?
very impressed by that. Oh my gosh, look at that.
Yes, it spins. Okay, so we've got all the names of people who've stuck around to the end. And I have removed some of the names of people that I know already have your book. And
Good. Sue's disqualified.
Preservation Texas staff. Sorry, guys. Okay, so these are in alphabetical. We're just going to shuffle and then spin.
That's pretty cool.
Alicia Quintance. Okay. We're going to remove that one and then spin one more time.
I'm definitely stealing this, Sam.
Paul Barrington. Okay.
Outstanding.
Okay. I have y'all's emails, Alicia and Paul, so I will get in touch about a shipping address. But other than that, I wanted to let you all know that next month's webinar will be presented by Margaret Dowdy with the Palacios Preservation Association. They've been the ones that have done the work towards saving the historic Luther Hotel that was threatened to be demolished. And they have officially succeeded. It was recently purchased by J.P. Bryan, and it's going to be restored and reopened as a hotel. And so she'll be telling the story of their grassroots efforts and how the 2 old ladies saved the most endangered building in Texas. That's going to be on Wednesday, November 20th at noon. So mark your calendars for that one. And thank you again, Gary, for your presentation.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for joining us today. I hope you have a good rest of your week. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.